Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Makwariola. At a time in history where the humanitarian crisis around the world alarming, there are growing concerns about the situation in Africa where barely enough is being done to reverse the situation. Boko Haram insurgency in northeastern Nigeria and around Lake Chad has uprooted more than 2 million people and left some 10 million in need of aid in what is considered one of the world's worst neglected crises. On this special episode of Africa Today, we'll bring you clips of an interview I had earlier with Edward Kallon, United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator in Nigeria. But before then, here is a report to launch the program. Welcome on board.
The war against Boko Haram has raged on since 2009, leaving in its wake thousands of widows, orphans and destitute, and in almost a decade of the mayhem unleashed by the insurgents in Nigeria's northeast. Millions have been displaced. For those lucky to be alive, most trekked days and traveled tediously to find a safe place. Yola houses 4 major IDP camps, and most of the IDPs have come from across many of the affected states to settle here. From Isge, Gwodza, Madagali, Mubi, Munguno, and other terror-ravaged communities, they are here, united by their stories of pain. 30-year-old Asana sold bean cakes, popularly known as kose, in her native town of Isge, close to Gwodza, in Borno State, before the attacks. The mother of 8 remembers a life of happiness before Boko Haram shattered her peace. Asana was pregnant with her 8th child when Boko Haram invaded her village. She and her family trekked miles, spending days in bushes as they sought safety. That was until her husband was captured, having been identified as an hunter. She's not seen him since and doesn't know what became of him. It's been 2 years and she now lives in the IDP camp in Damarie, learning to cope with being a mother and father to 8 children.
We met with Boko Haram insurgents. I lost my husband. We were together with him in the Boko Haram camp where we spent 15 days. Someone identified him as an hunter, then they captured him and took him away.
A report by the International Rescue Committee says more displaced persons are living in host communities in Yola than those living in the IDP camps. 16-year-old Naomi John is one of them. She recalls with pain her family's escape from Madagali and the agony of witnessing the death of her brother.
I have seen Boko Haram with my eyes because the first time they come to our village, it is around 7 o'clock. I'm just fetching water within our local village that we are. They now starting shooting gun. They now say, Allahu Akbar, we are doing the work of God. That's how the thing started.
She has resolved to move on. Naomi joined the Non-Formal Learning Center of the IRC. Now a tailor, she is determined to be the best fashion designer in Nigeria.
Yes, I can sew very well. Thank God for I have learned so because have helped me in my life. Wherever I go, I can help myself with this sewing.
A constant and ugly truth about the insurgency is that most of the women and girls captured by Boko Haram fighters were used as sex slaves. When Awa Suleiman was captured in Madagali village in 2015, the then 14-year-old endured the worst of bombing raids, hunger and disease alongside her captors. It was when she managed to escape that another sad fact confronted her. She was pregnant with twins. Her daughters Adiza and Miriam, born to a Boko Haram fighter, represent a bitter reminder of what she would rather forget.
I'm a victim of Boko Haram. We were taken from our villages and abused by the insurgents. I got pregnant and ran away from Madagali, found my way to Mubi, then to Yola.
Awa now attends the Adolescent Girls Learning Center here in Yola, and she has big dreams. Not many Nigerians have been actively engaged in volunteering to help the IDPs. So it was a pleasant encounter seeing Femi Kuti, who was visiting the camps. He is touched by these victims' resolve to hope against hope.
Imagine giving them the opportunity. Maybe one or two of them will become great musicians. But if you don't provide the facilities for them, then they become Boko Haram, they become thugs, they become robbers, they become envious of anybody that is wealthy. They become the terror of society.
Not enough attention has been given to victims of terror attacks in Nigeria's northeast. Much of what is seen is by international aid organizations. Sarah Indukumana and volunteers of the International Rescue Committee believe more attention should be given to these victims.
No one wants to live, depending upon others and having to hold a handout to get any sort of assistance. So I think they're just very tired and they want to stand on their own 2 feet again, but they need a bit more support.
They have the right to say that they want to become doctors, lawyers, or whatsoever you think that is very good for them.
As the war against terror rages, one would only hope that the Nigerian government builds structures that will make the dream of every one of these internally displaced persons a reality.
Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Makwariola. Well, right now we have an exclusive interview with the UN Humanitarian Coordinator in Nigeria, and he is Edward Kallon. Good to have you join us on the program.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, as a UN Humanitarian Coordinator, could you, before we get on the business, give us a bit of an experience you've had over the years? What has it been like for you?
It has been a long journey, which all started in Afghanistan in the 1989-90. It also took me to Pakistan, from Pakistan to Kenya, Kenya to Somalia, Somalia to Uganda, Uganda to Bangladesh, Bangladesh to Iraq, Iraq to India, India, Jordan, and now Nigeria. So it has been a 29-year marathon dealing with conflicts in different parts of the world.
And with this conflict you've seen around the world, how worrisome is it? Because we've had stories of people finding food to eat, being displaced out of conflict. How worrisome is it as at present? Did it change or is still the same?
The crises are getting worse. They are not getting better in trends, if we have to look at it from that perspective. And also the levels of human suffering are increasing. Conflicts are normally due to either political or development failures. And as a result of both factors, the ordinary citizen is caught in the path, moving ahead. I have seen very ugly faces of the impact on the human being, and I've also seen a very, very difficult and challenging times for people who have been confronted with the crisis in different contexts and in different parts of the world. As a humanitarian worker, there's always one thing that keeps us alive. That is that last smile, that hope you bring back to people who have been caught in a very difficult situation. I think that is what keeps us going, and that is what keeps us really venturing into more difficult and complex areas.
And how much has the United Nations been able to, well, weather the storm with these challenges that keeps the world turning up almost on every second? How has the UN able to hold the front?
I think the most recent development I can highlight to you was the World Humanitarian Summit that took place recently. At that summit, it became very clear to all member states that we should try to end crisis in whatever form. And we should try to look at crisis both from saving lives and also addressing the root causes, which in most cases are either political or long-term development deficits. In the case of Northeast Nigeria, you have climate vulnerabilities that is compounding the problem, and you also have the impact of the Boko Haram crisis, which is now mostly being seen as a protection and a food security and nutrition crisis.
Looking looking at northeast Nigeria, which according to United Nations and of course other international agencies, the level of displacement there is really, really complex. And of course, we have other countries in Africa. We have the case of South Sudan. And of course, let me not forget another country in the Middle East. But if we look at all this together and the level at which funding has been put forward, would you say there is much of a assistance you've been getting from other countries around the world to help these people who need humanitarian assistance?
I think since my arrival here, one of the key achievements we have made as humanitarian actors, together with the government, is trying to raise the impact of the Boko Haram crisis to the international level. This was achieved recently during the Oslo Pledging Conference, where it became extremely clear that there is need for international support to try to address the impact of a crisis. We also hosted recently in Nigeria the UN Security Council that visited the country and also had the opportunity to visit Maiduguri. They went back to the UN headquarters and they have just passed one of the first resolutions on the Boko Haram crisis, which I think is also helping to try to find a solution to this ugly face of the crisis in northeast Nigeria. And the resolution was quite timely because it looks at the military effort by the government of Nigeria, and it also looks at the needs of scaling up humanitarian assistance, but most importantly, it called for a holistic approach to try to address the root causes of this crisis in northeast Nigeria, which is mainly long-term development deficit, poverty, and the climate vulnerabilities.
And I'm glad you mentioned long-term development deficit. How much is the government, in terms of the government participation with the United Nations to help curb or help deal with the situation that you mentioned earlier in terms of how to, contain the humanitarian crisis?
One thing I can say outright is that the government effort has increased incrementally since I took over my responsibility here. And besides their intervention on the military side, which is also getting a lot of progress moving ahead, but also allocating resources to the crisis is also increasing. And we work very closely with the state authorities and also with the federal authorities. We have a very complex coordination mechanism, of course. We have the interministerial task force that brings together all the government line ministries. We have the Presidential Committee for the Northeast Initiative, which is an apex coordination body. We have the NIMA and the SEMAs at each state level and also at the federal level. So these coordination structures are meant to enable us bring together synergies and ensure that we provide timely assistance to the affected population while addressing the short-term needs, but also looking at the medium and longer-term needs of this population.
And these people who's been affected by the humanitarian crisis, they will definitely have some tales to tell in terms of trauma and having to, well, deal with the situation that is not really, will I say, friendly. Now, how is the United Nations in this regard helping these individuals who have lost their sense of dignity, who have lost their sense of belonging, who have lost every sense of who they really were before the crisis first began?
We are advocating heavily with state authorities, and that is why I told you at the beginning that the crisis is a protection crisis from our perspective. We are concerned about sexual gender-based violence in the camps. We are very concerned about sex slavery that is happening, and we are also very concerned about the violation of the rights of children in this conflict. We are advocating, and we are having some inroads, and we are having some support from the government of Nigeria to address these protection issues, especially in the displaced camps.
And could you be more specific in the areas that the United Nations is working towards?
We are working with the local authorities to scale up humanitarian assistance. We are providing food to the affected population. We're providing water, sanitation, and health services to the affected population. We are working with the state in early recovery to try to support people who are returning to safe areas, but I repeat, returning to safe areas with dignity, which is a very important element of return, which has to be voluntary moving ahead. And we are also addressing issues of sexual gender-based violence in the camps. We are providing shelter for the displaced population in camps, and you name it. All those basic social services that are so critical to bring hope back to this population.
Yeah, you just mentioned something now, sexual-based violence in camps, and this has gone on, you know, for some time. Even in other, where you have internally displaced persons, they're being sexually assaulted by those who should be protecting them. What is it that the United Nations or your agency is doing to stop this kind of trend from, you know, continuing as a norm, as it were?
We have brought this to the attention of the government and state authorities whenever we have privileged information to these violations. And we have also seen some improvement in terms of the redress of some of the issues that have been reported to the government on sexual gender-based violence. It's a very complex reality we are dealing with. It's a situation where people have been traumatized. And it's also a situation where people have got nothing to go back to. It's a very difficult reality. But we are proactive on the advocacy, and we also try to put in place preventive measures together with the state authorities, who are in principle responsible for protection. Yeah? So our job is catalytic, facilitative as much as possible.
All right, let's look at the Millennium Development Goals that has been transformed to SDGs. How would you say Nigeria is meeting up with these objectives? Are we doing any better?
The Sustainable Development Goals, as far as I'm concerned, are about national vision, they are about national leadership, and they are about national ownership. The SDGs, I see them as a fine thread, yeah, that we use to weave together the development aspirations of governments. Our job as the United Nations is to support governments to mainstream the SDGs in their both national and subnational plans. We also help them accelerate implementation of these goals, and then support them to put in place relevant policies that are critical in implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The Nigerian government is engaged. In fact, we just signed a few days ago a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Vice President that is responsible for the SDG, where the United Nations will be supporting the government of Nigeria to mainstream, you know, the SDGs, to help domesticate the SDGs at the state levels moving ahead. This goes in many areas, in the areas of data collection, policy articulation, budgeting and planning, etc., moving ahead. There is more that needs to be done. My hope is to see Nigeria develop a Marshall Plan of these SDGs, because Nigeria is a great nation, and Nigeria can be a big leader in Africa. So I'm also hopeful that Nigeria will take on board the Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union 2063 agenda, look at their economic recovery and growth plan, and then work towards the development aspiration of the government and people of Nigeria. So the SDGs, as I repeat, is that fine thread that we use to weave together the development aspirations of governments.
All right, finally, before I let you go, what is the future of other Africans who seem not to be, will I say, carried along by their respective governments and are left to take care of themselves? Well, in terms of humanitarian situation, I would say, what will be the future of these ones now so that they won't be left behind?
Yeah, one of the key messages of the Sustainable Development Goal is to leave no one behind. There are certain realities in development today, especially contemporary development, that are critical in moving forward. There is a lot of push by governments to look at multidimensional poverty, look at the income and consumption elements of poverty. What we are saying, look at those non-monetary elements that are also critical: health, sanitation, education, shelter. That is so critical, so you leave no one behind. It's not only to generate income, but try to use those income in an inclusive manner so that you leave no one behind. So at the centerpiece of the SDGs is that key message. What should government do to ensure that they are inclusive, in their approaches in support, and also ensure that the weaker part of society also benefits from prosperity moving ahead. Yeah, Lagos is a fantastic area I'm visiting now. I mean, it's an economic powerhouse in Nigeria, but I still see opportunities for the state authorities to work on multidimensional poverty, move a little bit away from income and consumption aspect of poverty, but also look at those non-monetary aspects that are so critical to ensure that no one is left behind.
All right, and at that point, I'd like to thank you, Edward Kallon, UN Humanitarian Coordinator in Nigeria. It's a pleasure to have your thoughts with us on Africa Today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for now on this segment. Thanks a lot for being a part of it. For a conflict that has separated families, destroyed livelihoods, and cut off access to basic amenities, the survival of millions of people depend on improved funding and investment in new solutions to address the escalating problem. Between short-term intervention and long-term solutions, more really needs to be done to protect the living and save the dying, restore order and sustain development in the region by any means possible. Well, that's our package for today. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC Connect, and also follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, I am Esther Omakwariola, and always remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.